Hello and welcome to the Aging Answers podcast. I'm Rob Fabian with Age of Central Texas. We're a regional nonprofit organization that serves older adults and family caregivers. And we are very happy to bring you this monthly podcast to talk about all things aging and caregiving. Our Aging Answers podcast is brought to you by HEB, because no one does more in Central Texas for older adults and family caregivers than my HEB.
You know HEB for quality fresh food at low prices to help you eat well. Now, HEB has primary care physicians and dietitians on staff to help you get and stay well. And because HEB believes affordable care should be accessible to all Texans, monthly memberships and cash payment options are available. Let HEB's team of highly reputable and experienced care providers help you on your health journey. Virtual and in-office visits are available. Visit heb.com/wellness to learn more today.
November is National Family Caregiver Month, and we are very excited to have Jessica Lehman joining us today. She is the Executive Director for AARP Texas. Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. This is such an important topic, and I'm so grateful that I get to work with Age of Central Texas, who does so much for folks aging in Central Texas.
And we are so grateful for AARP as well. They've been not only a local, but a national leader in caregiving support for many, many years. Jessica, let's start by talking about caregiving in America. Most people don't realize how many people are actually caregiving.
Well, as I believe, was it Rosalind Carter's famous quote, and she said it more eloquently, I am, but basically, you are a caregiver, you know a caregiver, you will receive care at some point in your life. So really and truly, all of us end up in the caregiving space at some point in our lives. And now many folks are in that sandwich generation who they have maybe aging parents as well as children at home. So, caregivers, there's a lot of numbers there. They tend to be women between 45 and 65, but that's really it's changing. Caregivers are so much broader than that. My father retired early to be a full-time caregiver for his mother, and so we really can't put them in a box anymore. I mean, it's truly something that we will all experience or need at some point in our lives.
That is so true. Traditionally, it's usually the oldest daughter who ends up being the caregiver, but lately that's kind of turned itself on its head. I'll give you a great example, me. I am the primary caregiver for my parents who are 85 and they're still living independently, but I spend every night at their house helping them so that they can still live independently. And we have found at a lot of the age events that are for caregivers, about 40% of the attendees are men who are the primary caregivers in their families.
Absolutely. And, I think it's important too to talk about sometimes we don't think of ourselves as caregivers, even when we are. And so, what makes you a caregiver really is a huge range of tasks and things to do, from sitting and just being a companion to somebody to, those hands on helping with activities, to managing someone's finances, or just helping bring a meal over. All of that is caregiving, and it all can have a huge impact not only on the life of the person you're caring for, but for your own as well. And so when we talk about resources, not only are we helping folks be better caregivers, but we also want to help unpaid family caregivers take care of themselves. So I know with my dad, he was a primary caregiver for his mother for 5 years. And I always say it aged him 20, because he put off so many of his own health needs during that time that within a few months of her dying, he ended up in emergency surgery because he had just let go of these little things that were showing up that he thought, I'll do that later. And so what we really want to see with caregivers is that they're taking care of their loved ones, which is a beautiful thing, but that they're also taking care of themselves. And that's not always easy to do.
That is so true. And, we've said this many times on this podcast that as a caregiver, you have to take care of yourself first. That's not being selfish, that is being realistic. Because if something happens to you, then who's going to help take care of your loved one? It's the old adage of putting your oxygen mask on first. And I know personally myself, having put off some of my own health issues while taking care of my parents. My father had a stroke 3 years ago, and so we had a big set of time there where I was spending a lot of time taking care of them and making sure that mom was okay as well. And, I delayed going to the doctor myself. And we see that so often. I think there's a statistic that says about 30% of all caregivers pass away before the person they're caring for if they don't get any help.
Right.
And then when the caregiver becomes 70 or above, the number jumps to 80% of them will pass away first. And that's no help for the person being cared for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One thing that I am very grateful for from AARP is the advocacy work that you guys have been doing on behalf of caregivers like myself. And one of the big things that has been very helpful was the passage of the CARE Act. And I think a lot of caregivers are not aware of that, how that is a great tool that we now have at our disposal. So walk us through a little bit about what the CARE Act is.
Yes. So the CARE Act, and I'm pulling it up. I want to get it right. It is, gosh, you have everything right in front of you. And then but the CARE Act, and it stands for certain words. Hold on. I had everything pulled up in front of me, but it's care, advise. Oh my goodness. Anyway, let's get to what it means. So the CARE Act is something that we work to pass, and we work to pass this in legislatures across the country. But what it means is it's to help when your loved one goes into the hospital and they transition from the hospital back into the home, which is what we all want to happen, right? And so what hospitals are now required to do, and have been for a few years now, is identify a caregiver for the patient, have that name on record. And then when it's time for that patient to transition back into the home after their hospital stay, they need to really help that caregiver understand what needs to be done at home. So it's not just enough to give someone a pamphlet and say in a checklist of here, do these things. Not only do they want to identify that caregiver, but they want to demonstrate the care that is needed in the home. And because this can be completely new. So it may be wound dressing. It could be, using a catheter, and how to insert, remove, clean, all of those things that when you've never done that before, a pamphlet just doesn't cut it. So hospitals are now required to do this for you. And if they're not doing it, you have the right to ask for it. They in a perfect world, they automatically do it, right? And that's what we want them to say, hey, we have your name on record as the caregiver, let us show you. But if they're not doing that, ask, and they have to do that. And it's just so important, because that is something that can be incredibly overwhelming for a caregiver when their loved one comes back into the home after a hospital stay. It's just feeling overwhelmed with what to do, how to make sure that they're back in the home safely, and that you feel as a caregiver that you fully understand those items and those things that need to be done, and that you're comfortable with it.
Yeah, none of us are really taught medical care for our loved ones. And so whenever you discharge, you now have in the state of Texas a law that says that the hospital has to show you everything you need to know when you go home. It's kind of two-pronged, and both are very positive. One is the caregiver has the information, is empowered, they know what to do when they get home. For the hospital, it also helps protect them, because hospitals don't want you coming back. Because they get dinged financially by insurance if you readmit for the same issue. So they're trying to prevent that from happening to them. But also it's wonderful for the caregiver, because now they are required to show you everything you need to know. So for example, with my father, when he discharged from rehab, we made sure we knew everything we needed to know going back into the home, the fall risks, what we needed to do for exercises so we could keep him active, what we needed to know about he had a brain bleed in his cerebellum. So we needed to know, okay, when is this blood going to go away and what's going to happen as we go down the road? And so sometimes, though, as caregivers, you have to advocate for yourself, because just as you mentioned, not every hospital employee knows this law.
Right. And it's not, and I say that it's not anything nefarious on the hospital's part. So a lot of times they are overwhelmed as anyone else. And so, that's why it's so important. They're not going to be frustrated when you ask for this. It's just sometimes they need a reminder, like we all do sometimes. And I want to go back. It is the caregiver advise, record, and enable. And I wanted to say that because those letters are important and they have meaning. So it's the CARE Act. So caregiver advise, record, enable. And I think that really sums up what it is trying to do. And you're right, they do get dinged if they have readmissions. They want you to be successful at home too. And so it's really a partnership between you and your loved one's medical team to make sure that everything goes successfully.
Yeah, my dad has now had 4 cardiac surgeries. And so we've learned quite a bit about hospital operations. But whenever we go in, I make sure that the charge nurse knows mother and I are both the primary caregivers. And so we need to have all the information at discharge. And, they write it down. They've got the big board in the room that has, they put the meds and all the info, and they write down who the primary caregivers are on that board, so that as every nurse and every medical assistant comes in, they can look on the board and they know who needs to have all the information. So it's a wonderful, wonderful act, because just in my own experience, I don't think I would know what to do with someone who's had a stroke if
Right.
I didn't have that resource to say to the hospital, I need you to tell me everything I need to know before we go home.
Right.
And so it's a wonderful thing that AARP has done, is making sure that that law was passed to help all of us as caregivers. And that's not the only advocacy that AARP is doing in the Texas area.
Right. Well, caregiving is such an important piece of the work that we do. I mean, AARP, we really look at, we call it health, wealth, and self. And caregiving is really all of those things. And so it really is kind of the vein through which we really look at almost all of the work we do to support people and empower them to age in the manner of their choosing. And so we're always looking at policy and practices that improve the lives of caregivers. So one of the things that we look at every legislative session is the Lifespan Respite Care Program. And this is a budget, a line item in the Texas budget that funds respite care for caregivers. And of course, every year the state is always looking to save money and see where it can cut. And we really are the voice saying, not that program. That is not where you find money. And in fact, you could always, put more money in that line item because it's so needed. And for folks who, respite is who don't know, respite is such an important part of being a caregiver. That is that time that you take for yourself to go to your doctor's appointments, have lunch with a friend, maybe just sit in quiet and read a book or binge Netflix. That's time for you to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. And if you don't have other family members who can help with that, respite care, when it's funded, you can take your loved one somewhere to get that care, or someone can come to your home and just relieve you. But we want to make sure that it is affordable for folks who may not have the resources to privately pay for that there are opportunities for them to get that respite care through the state. And in addition to that, sometimes our loved ones do have to go into a skilled nursing facility, but we're still caring for them and we're still caregivers even when our loved one is in a facility. And we want to make sure that when they go in, that they are safe and well cared for, and that you as a caregiver can trust that your loved one is going to be safe and cared for in those facilities. So we have worked on nursing home safety, including getting informed consent for the medications. Sometimes, your loved one needs a lot of different medications, and there are risks and benefits to all of those. And that sometimes those risks, particularly when it comes to antipsychotic drugs, are pretty big. And we want to make sure that the patient and their family members have informed consent and fully understand exactly what it means to take some of those medications and can make a choice of whether or not to proceed. And so until recently, that wasn't a standard practice. And now, as of the last legislative session, it is a standard practice in nursing, skilled nursing facilities, that the resident or their caregiver gives informed consent before they are given any form of antipsychotic drugs. So those are, a few of the other things that we're working on that really impact caregivers and their families.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that the long-term care communities are just another tool that we have
Right.
as caregivers. A lot of times we feel guilty when we have to place our loved one in a long-term care community. We may have made that pledge, oh, I'll never put you in a nursing home. But the reality is we're not trained to take care of someone who has multiple issues, that it's no longer safe for them to stay in the home, or we don't have the skills to safely keep them in the home. And so we're not giving up by any means when we place our loved one in a long-term care community. We're just using another tool that we have as caregivers. And our caregiving journey will change, but it doesn't end. And so knowing that we have this advocacy and we've got the support from AARP to help, I've got my arm around you and I've got your back to help you as you continue on that journey. The other wonderful thing I think about AARP is all of the wonderful online resources that you have. And as a national organization and as a local organization, both, there's such a plethora of wonderful information that you have on your websites.
Yes. So you can go to aarp.org/caregiving, and that will bring you to our Caregiving Resource Center. And so we have tons of articles and interviews and workbooks that you can order to get hard copies or just look at online. But there are, like you said, there's so many resources to help folks, and just a few that I think are particularly important, but you could go down the rabbit hole of so many things on that site. But one is our Prepare to Care guide. It is a great resource to help you as a caregiver. I love a good checklist. And so there are a number of kind of checklists and things to think about as a caregiver, as well as how to get organized, how to use other loved ones and create a team, a caregiving team for your loved ones, how to talk to your loved ones and make sure that their voice is included. Sometimes we forget, we go into fix-it mode and we forget to ask the person that we're caring for what they want. And so it's a good reminder that, they are the center of every plan that we make. And we have that in English, in Spanish, and in Chinese. And we also have it in the English version for a number of different cultures. So we have it in English for our Hispanic Latino community and our African American community and our Asian community and our LGBTQ community, because we want to make sure that culture is included, because your culture is such an important part of how you are as a caregiver and what your loved one wants. And so we wanted to make sure that folks could really see themselves in these different guides. And there are different needs and different challenges and opportunities. And so we recognize that. And so we wanted to target these to different communities, and they were written in partnership with those communities. And then we also have a guide specifically for veterans, because we know that there are some resources that are available to veterans that we want to make sure folks are taking advantage of and aware of. Also, with the Prepare to Care, we also have a caregiver's guide to finances. So sometimes you're managing someone else's money. And that can be very overwhelming. And you want to make sure that you are doing the right thing and that you're handling things appropriately. And so we have a guide to caring for someone's finances.
And
Which
best
not only
part,
are we not medical staff, we're not financial advisors either. So
and best part, all of this is free. Absolutely
absolutely.
free online. Yeah, the Prepare to Care guide is fantastic. I love that it is in multiple languages. I love that it's in multiple cultures. In addition to taking care of my parents, I also care for my husband who has early onset of dementia, and I use my LGBTQ Prepare to Care guide all the time because it is so helpful. Even though I work in this industry, once you start clicking into caregiver brain, you start forgetting all the things that you should know. And, it reminds me daily of folks who are not working in the caregiver realm. It can be just so overwhelming. And, there's so much time and your out-of-pocket expense that you have to dedicate in caregiving. And if you don't manage your time, you don't manage yourself, then you can go down a rabbit hole very quickly because, as you mentioned, you click into fix-it mode and all you want to do is make sure that everything is right. And you forget about the fact that you're dealing with a human being who you love.
Yep.
And not a thing. And you're a person too. And so you have to take that step back and realize, okay, even though I'm doing this as a caregiver, out of the goodness of my heart, because I want to do this, I need to take a step back and take a breath. And that's where respite is so important, and having those resources that you can go back to, because our caregiving journeys change. And what we're having today may not be what we have tomorrow. And, it just takes one good trip to the hospital and everything goes like this. And it's wonderful to know that all those resources are there, that as our caregiving journey changes, we can go back and see those resources and say, okay, here's what I need now, and take that with you to use.
Yes. And, there are things that we can ask others for help for that we don't always think about. So having that, someone, I could ask my cousin to bring a meal once a week, and people want to help. And sometimes we forget that people want to help. They just don't know what to do. And then we don't know what to do because we're too overwhelmed. And so having something say, here's a list of things you can ask others to help with, I find really helpful, because you don't always know what you need help with. And then you go, oh, that's a really great idea. Oh, could someone cut our grass every week? Wow, that would be such a load off. And I didn't even think to see if someone could do that. I mean, there's so much.
Yeah, you get so overwhelmed that you've got issues, but you don't know what questions to ask to try to resolve them.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that so much. And like Age of Central Texas, AARP is here to help you whenever you do run into a roadblock. So you can always contact our local chapters, and AARP has chapters all throughout the United States. You'll have a local one wherever you are, and you can contact them for assistance as well, because they can help you connect the dots to all of those resources that are available in the area that can help you out as a caregiver. Jessica, we thank you so much for joining us this morning and helping us to celebrate that it's National Caregiver Month. We've talked about it can be very overwhelming, but it can also be a really wonderful time of your life. Personally, I have gotten to spend so much time with my parents that I probably wouldn't spend if I were not in the caregiving mode. And by being able to go share a meal with them every night and just spend some time talking, I've learned so many wonderful things about my parents that I didn't know. I knew that they had met in Georgetown, and I knew that they had gone to college together there. But what I didn't know is how they actually first met. That my mother was a roller skating car hop at the drive-in. Never knew that. And Dad came through in his T-Bird driving around and saw her and fell in love instantly, and came back the next day and brought her a cashmere sweater.
I love that.
Never knew these things. I just thought that they had met at college. I didn't know that it had started before. and that was just the rest of the story. So lovely things that I get to learn about my family, about my history, and that I wouldn't have taken the time to spend the time with my parents otherwise. So there's so many wonderful things that come out of it, not only the warm fuzzies that you get by, going home knowing that I really helped them, but it has so many wonderful aspects to caregiving. So that's what we want to celebrate this month.
Absolutely.
And knowing that we have all these great resources that are available to us to help us to take the stress off, to take off the burden so that we can enjoy all those
Yes.
warm fuzzies that come with it. So if you are ever in need of anything, you can contact us here at Age of Central Texas. You can contact AARP. And as I always do, I want to close by saying, remember, there is never, ever any shame in asking for help, because all of us need help at some point in our life. And as caregivers, we were never trained really to do this. And so we're going to run into some strange things along the way that we're not sure how to handle. So that's why organizations like AARP are here. They're here to help you in that journey so that journey can be successful. We want to thank you so much for joining us today. Jessica, thank you again so much for taking your time out of a busy schedule to talk with us. And we hope that you have a wonderful National Caregiver Month, and let us know if we can ever be of service to you. Take care.
Hi, everyone.